Part 1. The Wanderer's Evening. A gentle story to calm your mind before sleep. In the rolling green hills of Willowmere, where the evening mist dances between ancient oak trees like spirits of forgotten dreams, a weary traveler named Ember walks slowly along a winding path of smooth river stones. Each stone had been polished by countless seasons of rain and wind, worn gentle by the passage of time and the soft footsteps of wanderers who had come before. The path meandered through meadows thick with wildflowers, purple clover that hummed with drowsy bees, golden buttercups that caught the last rays of sunlight, and delicate blue forget-me-nots that seemed to whisper secrets to the evening breeze. The day's journey had been long but pleasant, filled with the liquid songs of larks that spiraled upward into the endless blue sky, and the gentle whisper wind through meadow grass that bent and swayed like ocean waves frozen in green and gold. Ember had walked since dawn, when the world was still painted in shades of pearl and rose, to the bright hours of midday, when the sun hung like a benevolent eye watching over all creation, and now into the blessed coolness of approaching twilight. As the traveler moved forward with unhurried steps, the very air seemed to grow softer, more welcoming. It carried the mingled fragrances of 1,000 growing things. The honey-sweet perfume of wild roses climbing over ancient stone walls, the fresh green scent of new grass, the earthy richness of moss-covered logs that had fallen decades ago and now served as nurseries for delicate ferns and tiny wildflowers. Somewhere in the distance, a brook chuckled to itself as it wound between smooth stones, adding its voice to the evening's gentle symphony. The hills themselves seemed to breathe with contentment. They rolled away in all directions like a green quilt spread across the earth, dotted here and there with groves of silver birch and rowan trees, whose leaves rustled with sound like gentle applause. Ancient oaks stood sentinel in the meadows, their massive trunks testimony to centuries of patient growth, their spreading branches offering shelter to generations of creatures both great and small. Beneath their protective canopy, foxgloves grew tall and stately, their purple bells nodding in the breeze, as if keeping time to some unheard melody. Ember paused occasionally to rest upon the low stone walls that divided the countryside into a patchwork of fields and meadows. These walls had been built by hands long since dust, but they endured, covered now with cushions of moss and crowned with trailing ivy that caught dewdrops like scattered diamonds. From these resting places, the traveler could see for miles across the peaceful landscape, a realm where time seemed to move more slowly, where the urgent concerns of the wider world grew dim and distant as morning stars. As twilight deepened, the sky began its nightly transformation into a canvas of impossible beauty. The blue of day gradually gave way to deeper hues, lavender and violet, rose and gold, colors that had no name save in the language of dreams. High above, the first stars appeared like pinpricks of silver light in velvet darkness, while lower on the horizon, the sun prepared for its daily death and resurrection, painting clouds and shades of amber and coral that would have put master artists to shame. It was in this magical hour, when day and night met and mingled like old friends greeting after a long separation, that Ember's heart began to lift with anticipation. For ahead, still perhaps a mile distant but growing larger with each unhurried step, the warm amber windows of the Sleepy Hollow and began to glow like earthbound stars. The sight filled the weary traveler with a deep sense of coming home, though Ember had never seen this place before and knew not what welcome awaited within those welcoming walls. The inn seemed to grow from the landscape itself, as natural as the trees that surrounded it, as permanent as the hills on which it stood. Its windows flickered with candlelight that promised warmth and comfort, while a thin column of smoke rose straight up from its chimney into the still evening air, carried with it the scent of burning applewood and the promise of a hearth where travelers could warm their hands and hearts. The path began to descend now, winding down through a grove of hazel trees, whose branches formed a natural archway overhead. Here the evening light filtered through leaves that were already touched with the gold of coming autumn, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted and danced with each breath of wind. The very air seemed touched with magic, not the wild, dangerous magic of ancient tales, but something gentler, kinder, like the magic of a child's laughter or the perfect silence of snowfall on a winter night. As Ember drew closer to the inn, other details began to emerge from the gathering dusk. A small garden surrounded the building, enclosed by a low fence of weatherwood over which climbing roses spilled in profusion. Their blooms, though touched by evening shadow, still glow in inner light. White roses like captured moonbeams, red ones deep as wine, pink ones soft as a blush on a sleeping child's cheek. The garden was not formal or grand, but rather had the comfortable, lived-in beauty of a place tended by loving hands for many years. A cobblestone courtyard spread before the inn's front door, worn smooth by countless footsteps but kept free of weeds by careful tending. Here and there between the stones, small flowers had been allowed to take root. Chamomile and thyme that released their fragrance when stepped upon, creating a natural welcome mat that perfumed the air with each footfall. Ancient elm trees stood guard on either side of the courtyard, their massive trunks scarred by age but strong still, their branches reaching protectively over them like the arms of benevolent giants. The building itself was a masterwork of humble architecture, not grand or imposing, but perfectly suited to its purpose. Built of local stone the color of honey, with timbers of dark oak that had weathered to a rich silver gray, it seemed to have grown from the earth rather than been constructed upon it. The roof was thatched with golden straw, thick and well laid, crowned here and there with chimneys of the same honey-colored stone. Dormer windows peeked out from beneath the eaves like sleepy eyes, while the main windows on the ground floor glowed with a warm light that had drawn ember from afar. Above the heavy wooden door, carved with intricate patterns of leaves and vines, hung a sign painted in faded but still legible letters. The Sleepy Hollow Inn, rest for the weary, peace of the troubled. Below these words, an artist of long ago had painted a scene of perfect tranquility, a willow tree beside a still pond, with stars reflected in the water and a crescent moon riding high above. The sign swayed gently in the evening breeze, its chains creaking with sound like a distant church bell. As Ember approached the final yards of the inn's threshold, the sounds of the evening world began to change and soften. The daytime chorus of larks and thrushes gave way to the gentler voices of night, the soft hoot of an owl from some hidden perch, the rustle of small creatures settling into their nests, the whisper of wind through grass that had grown heavy with evening dew. From within the inn came the faintest suggestion of voices, not loud or raucous, but quiet and companionable, like the murmur of old friends sharing stories by a winter fire. The traveler paused at the garden gate, one hand resting on the smooth wooden latch, and took a moment to drink in the perfect peace of the scene. This was what the long day's walking had been leading toward. Not merely a place to sleep, though that was welcome enough, but a sanctuary from the cares and troubles of the world beyond these rolling hills. Here, in this pocket of tranquility, time moved at the pace of growing flowers and changing seasons rather than the frantic rush of human urgency. With a deep breath that seemed to draw in all the peace and beauty of the evening, Ember lifted the latch and stepped through the gate, feet finding the worn path that led between beds of lavender and rosemary to the inn's welcoming door. Each step brought a deeper sense of rightness, of having arrived not just at a destination, but at exactly the place where the heart had been yearning to rest. The journey was nearly over, but in the best possible way. Not with the finality of an ending, but with the promise of renewal that comes with finding safe harbor after a long voyage. Tomorrow would bring its own road, its own adventures and discoveries. But tonight there would be rest and warmth and a kind of peace that heals both body and spirit. As Ember's hand reached toward the inn's front door, the last light of day faded from the western sky, and the first stars began their nightly dance among clouds. The wanderer's evening was complete, and the promise of true rest lay just beyond the threshold. Part 2, The Welcoming Light. A gentle story to calm your mind before sleep. The inn stood nestled in its grove of silver birches like a jewel in a setting of living silver, their pale trunks gleaming in the gathering dusk like columns of moonlight made solid. The birch trees had been carefully tended over many years, their lower branches pruned to create natural windows through which the inn's warm light could spill out into surrounding garden, while their higher reaches formed a delicate canopy that filtered the starlight into dancing patterns of shadow and illumination. Between their slender trunks, carefully maintained pathways wound through beds of night-blooming flowers. Evening primrose that would open its pale yellow petals as darkness deepened, for clocks that waited for twilight to release their sweet perfume, and moonflowers that would unfurl like white satin banners to catch the light of moon and stars. The inn's thatched roof was a masterpiece of the thatcher's ancient art, laid thick with golden straw that had been harvested from fields blessed by many summers of gentle rain and warming sun. Each bundle had been carefully selected and laid with the skill passed down through generations, creating not merely shelter but a living crown that would breathe with the seasons, swelling slightly with rain, settling and warming under summer suns, providing perfect insulation against winter's cold breath. Here and there among the straw, small herbs had taken root, house leek with its thick, succulent leaves, and patches of moss that would glow silver green after rain, creating a roof that was part architecture and part garden. Climbing roses acclaimed the thatch as their kingdom, their sturdy canes winding upward year after year until they formed great cascades of blooms that hung like nature's own tapestries against the golden straw. These were old roses, varieties with names like poetry. Maidens blush with soft pink petals that deepened the rose of their hearts. Alba Maxima, whose white blooms seemed carved from ivory by master craftsmen, and musk rose, whose clusters of small cream-colored flowers released their fragrance most powerfully in the evening hours, as if they knew their scent would be most welcome when weary travelers sought rest and comfort. The roses had been tended with such care and patience that they seemed less like cultivated plants than like old friends of the inn itself. Their blooms, even in the fading light of evening, glowed with an inner radiance that spoke of soil enriched by years of loving attention, of pruning done by hands that understood the secret language plants speak to those who truly listen. Some of the canes had grown so large and old that they become woody as small trees, their bark silver with age, their newer growth still flexible and green, creating a living bridge between the earthy foundation of the inn and the sky above. From the inn's honey-colored stone chimney, smoke curled upward in a perfect column, rising straight and true into the still evening air before dispersing into wisps that seemed to merge with the gathering dusk. This was not the black, acrid smoke of coal or the thin gray stream it would burn in haste, but the rich, sweet-scented smoke of applewood that had been seasoned for years in dry storage, mixed perhaps with cherry wood that would add its own subtle fragrance to the blend. The smoke carried with it all the promise of warmth and comfort. Visions of hearth fires crackling merrily in stone fireplaces, of copper kettles singing on hob, of bread baking in ovens that had known the secret of perfect loaves for generations beyond counting. Through the diamond-paned windows, Ember could see the flicker of candlelight that spoke of a simpler, gentler way of life. These were not the harsh, steady flames of gas or the cold glare of electric bulbs, but the living light of beeswax candles that danced and swayed with each breath of air, creating patterns of light and shadow that moved like living things across the walls within. The windows themselves were works of art, each pane of glass slightly different from its neighbors, some clear as crystal, others bearing the subtle waves and bubbles that spoke of glass blown by hand in ages past, when craftsmen took pride in creating beauty even in the most humble and practical objects. The window frames had been carved from oak that had grown slowly in ancient forests, its grain tight and strong from decades of patient growth. They had been fitted with a precision that comes only from master craftsmanship, sealed against weather yet allowing the building to breathe, painted with many coats of deep green paint that had weathered to a soft sage color that harmonized perfectly with the natural tones of stone and thatch and the silver bark of the surrounding birches. Through these windows, Ember could catch glimpses of the inn's interior, not clearly enough to intrude upon the privacy of those within, but sufficient to see the gentle movement of folk sharing quiet conversation around tables of dark with polish smoothed by countless meals and gatherings. There was something infinitely peaceful about these half-seen figures, the way they moved with unhurried grace, the way they leaned toward each other in the manner of people who had found, at least for this evening, a sanctuary from the troubles and pressures of the world beyond these walls. The inn's front door was a masterpiece of the joiner's craft, built of English oak that had been seasoned until it was hard as iron yet still retained the warm, living feel of wood. It had been hung on hinges of hand-forged iron, black with age but still strong and true, their decorative scrollwork speaking of a time when even the most practical objects were expected to please the eye, as well as serve their function. The door itself was carved with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story, vines and leaves that spiraled upward from bottom to top, interspersed with tiny flowers and berries, and here and there a small bird or butterfly, as if the carver had sought to bring the garden itself into the very portal of the inn. The door knocker was a work of art in itself. A brass ring held in the mouth of a lion whose expression was benevolent rather than fierce, his mane flowing in stylized waves around a face that seemed to smile in welcome rather than roar in challenge. The brass had been polished until it gleamed like gold, and though it showed the green patina of age in its deeper recesses, It had clearly been maintained with the same loving care that was evident in every other detail in construction and upkeep. But even as Ember approached this welcoming threshold, hesitating only for a moment to appreciate the beauty and craftsmanship that spoke of generations of care and attention, the heavy wooden door began to open from within. It swung back on hinges so well-maintained that they made no sound, revealing in the doorway a figure that seemed to embody all the warmth and welcome that the inn promised to weary travelers. The innkeeper was a woman of middle years whose age seemed less important than the kindness that radiated from her like warmth from a well-tended fire. Her hair, silver-streaked but still thick and lustrous, had been braided and coiled at the nape of her neck in a style that was both practical and elegant, held in place with combs of polished horn that caught the candlelight from within the inn. Her dress was of soft wool dyed a deep blue that seemed to shift between navy and midnight as the light played across its folds, cut in a simple style that spoke of comfort and practicality while still maintaining an air of quiet dignity. But it was her eyes that truly marked her as someone special, eyes like starlight, clear and bright, with inner radiance that seemed to come from a spirit that had found peace with the world and her place in it. They were eyes that had seen much, perhaps suffered some, but had chosen to focus on the beauty and goodness that could be found even in the darkest times. When she looked at Ember, it was with the gaze of someone who saw not a stranger to be judged or evaluated, but a fellow traveler in need of rest and comfort, someone deserving of the best hospitality she could provide. Her hands, visible beneath the turned-back sleeves of her dress, were the hands of someone who worked with purpose and skill, not soft and pampered, but not rough or coarsened either. They were hands that had kneaded countless loaves of bread, arranged flowers in vases, soothed fevered brows, and performed 1,000 small acts of service that make a house a home and a mere building a place of refuge. Her fingers bore a single ring, not a wedding band, but a simple silver band set with stone that seemed to hold captured moonlight, perhaps a memento of someone dear, or simply a reminder of beauty that could be carried always. She had opened the door before Ember could even knock, as if she possessed some inner sense that told her when weary travelers approached her threshold. Perhaps it was simply the practiced intuition of someone who had spent years in service to others, learning to read the signs that spoke of need and weariness. Or perhaps it was something more mysterious at work, the kind of gentle magic that seems to gather around places and people dedicated to healing and comfort. "Welcome, dear traveler," she said, and her voice was everything her appearance had promised. Soft as velvet, warm as honey, carrying within it the accumulated wisdom of years spent in service to others' needs. It was a voice that comforted children frightened by nightmares, had offered encouragement to those facing difficult journeys, had spoken words of blessing over countless meals shared with strangers who left as friends. There was music in it, the kind of natural melody that comes not from training, but from a heart attuned to harmony with the world around it. Her words seemed to hang in the evening air like a blessing, and Ember felt immediately that this was not mere polite greeting, but genuine welcome, the kind of hospitality that sees in every stranger a guest worthy of the best treatment possible. This was Rosalind, though she had not yet given her name, and she embodied everything that the inn promised to those who sought shelter beneath its welcoming roof. "We've been expecting someone just like you," she continued, stepping back to allow Ember to cross the threshold from the cool evening air into the warmth and light that waited within. Her words carried no hint of surprise or curiosity about who this traveler might be or what had brought them to her door. Instead, they suggested a deep understanding that the inn existed precisely for such moments, for meeting of need with provision, of weariness with rest, of loneliness with companionship. The light that spilled out from behind her was everything the windows had promised, warm and golden, dancing with the movement of candle flames, carried with it the mingled scents of beeswax and bread, of herbs drying in bunches, and wine aging in wooden casks. It was light that invited without demanding, that welcomed without question, that promised comfort without asking anything in return save the simple courtesy that fellow travelers owe to one another. Part 3. The Chamber of Rest. A gentle story to calm your mind before sleep. Rosalind led Ember up a staircase that seemed to have been crafted by hands that understood the poetry of ascent, not the harsh, angular efficiency of modern construction, but something that recognized the act of climbing toward rest as a ritual worthy of beauty and care. Each step had been worn smooth by countless gentle footsteps, the wood polished to a soft sheen that caught and held the candlelight from the sconces placed at regular intervals along the way. These steps were wide and shallow, allowing for unhurried progress, inviting the climber to take time, to breathe deeply, to let the cares of the day begin their gradual dissolution with each upward movement. The staircase curved gently as it rose, following the natural lines of the inn's construction rather than forcing straight angles upon organic space. The banister was a masterwork of the carver's art, not overwrought with excessive ornamentation, but enhanced with subtle touches that pleased both hand and eye. Vines twisted along its length, their leaves so skillfully rendered that they seemed to stir with each breath of air, while tiny flowers bloomed at regular intervals, each one different from its neighbors, as if the craftsman had taken inspiration from a real garden where no two blossoms were exactly alike. The walls that rose alongside this gentle ascent were adorned with treasures that spoke of years of careful collection and curation. Here were pressed flowers arranged in frames of weathered oak, not the hasty work of a single afternoon, but the patient accumulation of perfect specimens gathered over many seasons. Each flower had been chosen at the peak of its beauty, pressed with such skill that the colors remained vibrant and true, the delicate structures preserved so perfectly that one could count the individual stamens on a buttercup, trace the intricate veining in a violet's petal, marvel at the gossamer delicacy of a poppy's tissue-thin bloom. Between these botanical treasures hung watercolor paintings that captured the essence of peaceful landscapes with an artist's loving eye. These were not grand, dramatic scenes designed to overwhelm the viewer with their power, but gentle visions of tranquility that invited contemplation rather than demanded attention. Here was a meadow in early morning, mist rising from grass heavy with dew, painted in such soft washes of color that it seemed the mist might actually be moving in the candlelight. There, a cottage garden in full summer bloom, every brushstroke revealing the artist's intimate knowledge of how light fell across different petals at different hours of the day. Another painting showed a woodland path disappearing into deep shadows, but rather than seeming dark or forbidding, it suggested mystery of the gentle kind. The sort of mystery that promises discovery rather than danger, that invites exploration rather than retreat. The artist had captured that moment when afternoon light filters through a leafy canopy, creating pools of gold and green that seemed to shift and dance even within the confines of the painted frame. Each work was signed with simple initials in one corner, suggesting they were the product of local artists who painted not for fame or fortune, but for the simple joy of capturing beauty and sharing it with others. The passage grew narrower as it climbed, but rather than feeling cramped or confining, it took on the intimate quality of a secret path, a private way known only to those privileged to be guests of this special place. The ceiling here was low enough that tall visitors might need to duck slightly beneath the ancient beams, but this only added to the sense of shelter and protection, of being enclosed within walls that stood strong against storm and time for generations beyond memory. Small alcoves had been carved into the walls at intervals, each holding a single candle in a holder of polished brass, their steady flames creating pools of warm light that overlapped and merged to banish any possibility of shadow or darkness. Between these alcoves, the walls themselves were painted in colors that seemed to have been mixed from the very essence of peace. Soft blues like a summer sky at dusk, gentle greens like new leaves in spring, warm creams like fresh milk or the first light of dawn. At the head of the stairs, a small landing opened out beneath a window that had been set into the sloping roof, its diamond panes revealing a view of the star-scattered sky above. Here Rosalind paused, not from any need to catch her breath, for she moved with the easy grace of someone accustomed to this climb, but to allow Ember a moment to appreciate the view and to let the peaceful atmosphere then work its gentle magic upon a spirit still wound tight from the day's travels. From this vantage point, the guests could look out over the inn's gardens and see them laid out like a living tapestry in the starlight. Beds of flowers that had been invisible from ground level revealed their careful planning and design, not the rigid geometry of formal gardens, but the flowing curves and natural clusters that spoke of a gardener who understood that true beauty comes from working with nature rather than imposing arbitrary patterns upon it. Here and there, fruit trees stood sentinel in the moonlight, their branches heavy with apples and pears that would soon be ready for harvest, their leaves rustling with sound like whispered secrets. "Your chamber is just here," Rosalind said softly, her voice respectful of the profound quiet that seemed to inhabit these upper reaches of the inn. She indicated a door of warm oak, its surface glowing with the patina of age and careful maintenance. Like everything else in this place, it had been crafted with attention to both function and beauty. Solid and well-fitted to ensure privacy and comfort, but carved with a simple pattern of leaves and acorns that transformed a merely practical barrier into something that pleased the eye and lifted the spirit. The brass handle turned smoothly beneath Rosalind's gentle touch, well-oiled hinges allowing the door to swing open without the slightest sound. Beyond lay the guest chamber, and Ember's first glimpse revealed a space that seemed to have been designed by someone who understood the deepest needs of the weary traveler. Not merely the practical requirements of shelter and warmth, but the soul's hunger for beauty, peace, and the kind of comfort that heals more than just physical fatigue. The chamber was small, but small in a way that a jewel is small, compact and perfect, every element carefully chosen and placed to create maximum harmony and comfort within the available space. The room's proportions have been calculated with an intuitive understanding of what makes a space feel welcoming rather than cramped, intimate rather than confining. The ceiling sloped gently down from the window side, following the line of the inn's roof. But rather than making the room feel closed in, this gave it a cozy, nest-like quality that spoke of safety and shelter. The walls had been painted in a soft cream color that seemed to glow with its own inner light, a shade so perfectly chosen that it appeared to change subtly with the movement of the candles placed around the room. Against this neutral backdrop, touches of color had been added with the restraint of a master artist. A border painted just below the ceiling line in soft blues and greens, depicting a stylized version of the climbing roses that crowned the inn's roof, their blooms and leaves intertwining in an endless dance that seemed to move and flow in the flickering candlelight. The floor was made of oak boards that had been worn smooth by years of careful use, their natural grain enhanced rather than hidden by the beeswax finish that had been lovingly maintained for generations. Upon these boards lay several small rugs woven in patterns that suggested distant lands and ancient traditions, not exotic or overwhelming, but different enough from the local style to hint at stories of trade and travel, of craftspeople in far places who had put their skill into creating beauty for strangers they would never meet. But it was a bed that truly dominated the chamber, and rightly so, for this was furniture designed to provide not merely rest but restoration, not simply sleep but the deep, healing slumber that allows both body and spirit to renew themselves completely. The bed frame was of dark walnut, its wood so deeply polished that it seemed to hold light within its grain, reflecting the candle flames like a still, dark pool reflecting stars. The headboard had been carved with a design that seemed to grow organically from the wood itself, branches and leaves that intertwined with such naturalistic skill that they seemed to have been formed by nature rather than human hands. The bed was covered in quilts that spoke of generations of patient needlework, layer upon layer of fabric in colors like morning clouds, soft grays and whites, pale blues and the faintest hint of rose, all worked together in patterns that seemed to shift and change as the eye followed their intricate paths. These were not mere bed coverings, but works of art created by hands guided by love and skill, each stitch placed with care, each color chosen for its contribution to the whole. The top quilt was particularly beautiful, its pattern suggesting a sky filled with gently moving clouds, so perfectly executed that looking at it induced the same sense of peaceful contemplation that comes from watching real clouds drift across a summer sky. Pillows in abundance were piled at the bed's head. Not the hard, impractical decorative cushions that serve no purpose beyond display, but soft, inviting pillows designed for actual comfort, covered in fabric of the finest linen that had been washed and re-washed until it achieved the perfect balance of softness and support. They were arranged with casual elegance, suggesting that the guests need only select those that best suited their preferences and push the others aside, creating a custom arrangement for their own comfort. Beside the bed stood a small table of the same dark walnut as the bed frame, its surface bearing the kind of items that transform a mere room into a true sanctuary. Here was a pitcher and basin of fine ceramic, painted with a delicate pattern of forget-me-nots in blue and white, filled with water that was somehow exactly the right temperature, not cold enough to shock, not warm enough to seem stale, but perfectly suited for the gentle ablutions that prepare both body and spirit for rest. The chamber's single window looked out upon something extraordinary, a garden that seemed to exist in a realm between the ordinary world and the domain of dreams. From this elevated perspective, Ember could see the careful arrangement of beds and pathways, but more than that, could perceive the garden's deeper purpose as a place of healing and restoration. Night-blooming jasmine had been trained along trellises positioned to catch the evening breeze, their white flowers glowing like stars against their dark green leaves, their perfume drifting up to the window with such sweetness that it seemed to carry with it the promise of peaceful dreams. Window boxes had been attached beneath the sill, filled with herbs chosen not only for their practical uses, but for their ability to soothe both body and mind. Lavender stood in neat rows, its purple spikes releasing their drowsy fragrance into the night air, while beside it grew chamomile with its tiny white flowers that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Mint added its clean, fresh scent to the mixture, and rosemary contributed the piney fragrance that was said to improve memory and banish nightmares. The window itself was fitted with shutters that could be closed for complete darkness or left open to admit the gentle influences of moonlight and starlight. Between the shutters hung curtains of the finest linen, dyed a soft blue-green that suggested both sky and sea, their fabrics so light and airy that they seemed to breathe with each movement of the night breeze. When drawn, they would filter light rather than block it completely, allowing the guest to wake gradually with the dawn rather than being shocked into consciousness by harsh morning light. Upon the washstand, beside the basin and pitcher, lay a sprig of lavender so fresh that it might have been cut only moments before. Its presence was both practical and symbolic. Practical because its scent would help ensure peaceful sleep. Symbolic because it represented the care and attention that had been lavished on every detail of the guest's comfort. This was not lavender picked carelessly or in haste, but a perfect specimen chosen with the eye of someone who understood that small touches often mean more than grand gestures. "Rest well," Rosalind murmured as she placed a cup of chamomile tea on the bedside table with the care of someone handling a precious gift. The cup itself was a work of art. Fine porcelain so thin it was almost translucent, painted with a simple pattern of meadow flowers that seemed to dance around its rim. The tea within was golden and fragrant, its steam rising in delicate spirals that carried with them the promise of deep, dreamless sleep. Her words were more than mere courtesy. They were a blessing, a gentle command from someone who understood that rest was not a luxury to be enjoyed when convenient, but a necessity to be embraced when offered. The tea had been brewed with water drawn from the inn's own well, water that filtered through layers of earth and stone until it achieved a purity that enhanced rather than masked the delicate flavor of the herbs. The chamomile had been grown in the inn's own gardens, harvested at the perfect moment when its essential oils were at their peak, dried with such care that it retained all its beneficial properties. "The night is kind here," she continued, her voice growing even softer as she prepared to leave Ember to the chamber's peaceful embrace, "and morning is still far away." These words carried with them the promise that this was a place outside the ordinary flow of time, where the pressures and deadlines of the everyday world held no power, where rest could be complete and uninterrupted, where healing could take its own natural course without interference from external demands or expectations. As Rosalind moved toward the door, her steps silent on the polished oak floor, she paused to light one final candle. A thick pillar of pure beeswax placed in a holder of carved soapstone, its flames steady and bright, positioned to provide gentle illumination without disturbing the chamber's essential tranquility. This was not the harsh light of electric bulbs or gas flames, but the living light that had comforted humanity since the beginning of time, light that danced and breathed with the natural rhythms of air and flame. The door closed behind her with the softest of sounds, leaving Ember alone in this perfect sanctuary, surrounded by beauty and comfort that spoke of generations of dedication to the ancient art of hospitality at its finest. Part 4. The Garden's Secret. A gentle story to calm your mind before sleep. Unable to sleep immediately, though the chamber was perfect in every detail and the chamomile tea had left a taste of peaceful dreams upon the tongue, Ember found themselves drawn to the small balcony that opened from the room's single window. Perhaps it was the lingering energy of the day's long walk that still hummed quietly in travel-weary muscles. Or perhaps it was a natural curiosity that stirs in the heart when one finds oneself in a place touched by something beyond the ordinary. The night air called softly through the open window, carrying with it fragrances and whispers that spoke of mysteries waiting to be discovered by those wise enough to listen. The balcony was small but perfectly formed, its stone floor worn smooth by weather and time, its iron railing worked in the same flowing patterns of leaves and vines that decorated the staircase within. The metalwork had been painted long ago in dark green, a color that had weathered to something softer and more subtle, allowing it to blend seamlessly with the natural world that surrounded it. Here and there, actual vines have found purchase in the decorative scrollwork, their living tendrils interweaving with the iron leaves until it became difficult to say where craft ended and nature began. From this vantage point, elevated above the inn's main floor, but not so high as to feel separated from the earth below, Ember could look out over the garden that surrounded the building like a living embrace. During the daylight hours of arrival, glimpses caught through windows and doorways had suggested a pleasant enough space. The usual mixture of practical herbs and decorative flowers that one might expect around any well-tended inn. But now, in the deep quiet of night, with most of the world settled into sleep in the veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary grown thin, the garden revealed itself as something far more remarkable. The first thing that caught Ember's attention was the light. Not the harsh glare of torches or lanterns, nor even the steady glow of well-trimmed candles, but something altogether more mysterious and beautiful. It was not quite moonlight, for though the moon hung in the star-scattered sky above, it was but a slender crescent, a silver parenthesis against the velvet darkness, beautiful but not bright enough to illuminate the scene below with such clarity. Nor was it quite starlight, though the stars themselves twinkled overhead like scattered diamonds on midnight silk, their distant fire too remote to cast such gentle radiance upon the earthbound garden. Instead, the light seemed to emanate from the flowers themselves, as if each bloom had captured and stored the essence of sunlight during the day and now released it slowly, like a sigh of contentment made visible. White roses glowed like captured moonbeams, their petals seeming to hold within them all the silver light that had ever fallen from the night sky, while nearby beds of night-blooming cereus opened their magnificent flowers like stars fallen to earth, each bloom a miracle of cream and gold that pulsed gently with its own inner luminescence. The garden's pathways, which had seemed ordinary enough in daylight, simple gravel walks bordered by low hedges of lavender and rosemary, now revealed themselves as streams of crushed pearl and silver, each stone carefully chosen not just for its practical qualities, but for its ability to catch and reflect the mysterious light that suffused the entire space. Where the paths curve around flower beds or circled ancient trees, they seemed to flow like liquid light, guiding the eye in graceful arcs that led inevitably toward the garden's heart. Lily pads floated on a small pond that Ember had not noticed from ground level, their broad green surfaces serving as platforms for flowers that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of a sleeping heart. Each lily bloom pulsed gently with soft white and pale yellow light, their glow reflected in the still water beneath to create the illusion that stars had fallen from heaven to rest upon the pond's dark mirror. The water itself was so clear and still that it might have been a sheet of polished obsidian, broken only by the gentle rings that spread outward when a night-flying insect touched the surface or a small fish rose to investigate some floating morsel. Around the pond's edges, cattails stood in stately rows, their brown seed heads swaying gently in the night breeze, while water iris lifted their purple and yellow blooms like banners proclaiming the water's purity and peace. Here and there, a night heron might be glimpsed, standing motionless as a carved statue until some small movement of fish or frog caught its attention, reminding the observer that this was not merely a decorative feature, but a living ecosystem where creature and plant existed in perfect harmony. But it was toward the center of this enchanted space that Ember's gaze was most powerfully drawn, for there stood something that commanded attention through its sheer presence and dignity. An ancient willow tree rose from the heart of the garden like a great green fountain, its massive trunk speaking of centuries of patient growth, its bark deeply furrowed with the lines that come only with great age and wisdom. This was not merely a large tree, but a patriarch among trees, a living monument to the power of patience and the beauty that comes from accepting one's place in the great cycle of growth, death, and renewal. The willow's branches hung like a living curtain around its mighty trunk, their drooping form creating a natural pavilion beneath the spreading canopy. These branches moved with a grace that seemed almost deliberate, swaying not just at the random movements of the night breeze, but in patterns that suggested some deeper rhythm, some music audible only to those who knew how to listen with more than their ears. The leaves themselves seemed to whisper secrets as they brushed against one another, their surfaces catching and reflecting the garden's mysterious light until the entire tree seemed to shimmer like something seen in dreams. In the deep shadow beneath the willow's canopy, Ember could just make out the suggestion of a circular bench, built perhaps of the same honey-colored stone as the inn itself, worn smooth by generations of visitors who had sought rest and contemplation in this peaceful spot. The bench seemed to invite rather than merely accommodate, its curves following the natural flow of the tree's roots, its height perfectly calculated to provide comfort for those who wish to sit quietly and absorb the profound peace that seemed to radiate from this ancient guardian of the garden. The more Ember studied the scene below, the more details revealed themselves, each one adding to the sense that this was no ordinary garden but a place where the boundary between the natural world and something deeper, more mysterious, had grown gossamer thin. Beds of flowers that had seemed randomly planted during the day now revealed their careful arrangement. Not the rigid geometry beloved of formal gardeners, but something more subtle and profound, patterns that seemed to flow like music made visible, harmonies of color and form that please the eye while touching something deeper in the soul. Night-blooming morning glories had opened their trumpet-shaped flowers along trellises that seemed to glow with their own inner light, their blooms ranging in color from deepest purple through lavender to pure white, each one perfect in its formation, each one contributing to a symphony of color that shifted and changed as different flowers opened and closed in response to some internal rhythm as precise as any timepiece, but far more beautiful. Moonflowers, those mysterious blooms that open only in darkness, had unfurled like white satin banners throughout the garden, their faces turned upward toward the star-scattered sky, as if listening for messages from distant worlds. Their fragrance was unlike anything from the ordinary world. Not the simple sweetness of roses or the sharp clarity of herbs, but something that seemed to carry within it the essence of peace itself, a perfume that calmed the mind and opened the heart to wonder. Between the larger displays, smaller treasures waited to be discovered by the attentive eye. Here, a patch of white violets glowed like tiny stars fallen among their heart-shaped leaves. There, a cluster of night-blooming stock released its clove-scented fragrance into the still air. Everywhere the eye looked, it found new marvels, flowers that seemed to pulse gently with their own inner light, leaves that whispered secrets in languages older than human memory, stones that had been placed with such care and precision that they seemed to sing in harmony with the living things around them. As Ember stood transfixed by this vision of earthbound paradise, movement caught the corner of the eye. Other guests of the inn, it seemed, had also been drawn from their chambers by the garden's mysterious allure. On balconies similar to the one from which Ember observed, other figures stood in quiet contemplation, their faces touched by the same wonder and peace that now filled the heart of every observer. But there was something remarkable about their behavior. No one called out to their neighbors. No one broke the profound silence with unnecessary words or exclamations of amazement. It was as if everyone understood instinctively that this was a moment outside ordinary time, a gift that should be received in silence and gratitude rather than diminished by the clamor of human voices. The very air seemed to encourage this reverent quiet, thick with the kind of peace that makes even thought of speech seem unnecessary. Communication here was of a different sort. The wordless understanding that passes between souls who recognize in one another the same capacity for wonder, the same hunger for beauty that transcends the merely practical concerns of everyday existence. On the balcony to the left, an elderly gentleman stood with his hands resting on the iron railing, his white hair gleaming silver in the mysterious light, his face reflecting a peace so profound it seemed to emanate from his very being. He had the look of someone who had traveled far and seen much, but who had found in this moment something that made all the journey's trials worthwhile. His clothing was simple but well made, the garb of someone who valued quality over ostentation, and the way he stood, perfectly still, perfectly balanced, suggested a man who had learned the art of being present in each moment rather than always rushing toward the next. To the right, a young woman leaned against her balcony's railing, her long hair falling like a curtain of silk over one shoulder, her face turned upward toward the star-scattered sky, as if she could read messages written in their ancient light. She wore a nightgown of white linen that seemed to glow in the garden's radiance, and around her shoulders she had wrapped a shawl of some material so fine it might have been woven from moonbeams. Her expression was one of perfect contentment, the look of someone who had found exactly what she had been seeking without even knowing she was searching for it. On other balconies, other figures maintained their silent vigil. A middle-aged couple who stood close together, their hands intertwined, their faces reflecting the same peaceful wonder, a young man who sat on the edge of his balcony with his legs dangling over the side, his chin propped in his hands like a child watching fireworks. an elderly woman wrapped in a quilt who rocked gently in a chair that must have been provided for her comfort, her movements keeping time with some internal rhythm that seemed to harmonize perfectly with the subtle swaying of the willow's branches far below. All of these watchers, different as they were in age and appearance, shared the same expression of profound peace, the same sense of having stumbled upon something miraculous and healing. They were like pilgrims who had reached the end of a long journey to find that their destination exceeded their wildest dreams, or like children who had discovered a secret garden where all their wishes for beauty and wonder had been fulfilled beyond their ability to imagine. The garden itself seemed to respond to their attention, glowing more brightly as more eyes fell upon it, as the combined wonder and appreciation of its human observers fed some deep need within its mysterious being. Flowers that had been merely luminous before now pulsed with gentle radiance, while the willow tree at the garden's heart swayed in patterns that seemed almost like a dance, its branches moving in harmonious spirals that drew the eye upward toward the star-scattered sky above. It was in this moment of perfect communion between human observer and natural wonder that Ember began to notice a sound, or perhaps it was more accurate to say the absence of ordinary sound, and the presence of something far more subtle and beautiful. The usual night noises, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of owls, the rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth, had not disappeared, but they had somehow been transformed, woven together into something that was less noise and music, a symphony of the natural world that seemed to emanate from the garden itself. Part 5. The Tree's Gentle Song. A gentle story to calm your mind before sleep. As Ember watched with growing wonder from the small balcony, the ancient willow at the garden's heart began to reveal the source of the mysterious harmonies that seemed to weave through the night air like threads of silver music. The tree's massive branches, which had been swaying gently in what might have been mistaken for ordinary response to the evening breeze, now began to move with an unmistakable purposefulness, their graceful arcs following patterns that were clearly far more complex and meaningful than random wind-stirred motion. The willow's branches moved as if guided by an invisible conductor who understood the deepest secrets of natural rhythm, each drooping limb finding its place in an intricate dance that seemed to encompass not just the tree itself but the entire garden, perhaps even the star-scattered sky above. The movement was hypnotic in its beauty, not the wild, abandoned dance of storm-tossed trees, nor mechanical repetition of branches bent by steady wind, but something that spoke of ancient wisdom and patient joy, of a consciousness so old and deep that it had learned to find music in the very act of existence. The branches swayed in complex spirals, some moving clockwise while others turned in the opposite direction, creating patterns that seemed to shift and change even as the eye tried to follow them. Near the tree's crown, the thinner branches traced delicate filigrees against the starlit sky, their movements quick and light as the flutter of butterfly wings, while lower down, the heavier limbs moved with stately grace, their arcs broad and sweeping, carried with them cascades of leaves that caught and reflected the garden's mysterious light. It was the leaves themselves that produced the willow's song, though song seemed an inadequate word for something so complex and beautiful. As the branches swayed and turned, the leaves brushed against one another with infinite subtlety, creating sounds that ranged from the softest whisper to the gentle susurration of silk against silk. But these were not random rustlings. Each leaf seemed to know its part in the greater composition, contributing its voice to harmonies that built and faded, crescendoed and diminished, with all the sophistication of the finest music ever composed by human hands. The sound was like rain on a cottage roof during a gentle summer shower, not the harsh drumming of a thunderstorm, but the kind of soft, steady patter that lulls children to sleep and brings peace to troubled hearts. It was like pages turning in a beloved book, the whisper of paper against paper as stories unfold and knowledge passes from page to mind to memory. It was like waves lapping gently against a pebbled shore, the eternal rhythm of water meeting land in the kind of embrace that speaks of home and safety and the deep continuity that underlies all change. But more than any of these individual sounds, the willow's song carried within it something that touched the very essence of what it meant to be alive and growing in harmony with the natural world. It spoke of deep roots that had drunk from underground streams for centuries, drawing not just water but wisdom from the earth's patient heart. It sang of seasons turning slowly, of the patient accumulation of rings within the trunk, each one a year's worth of growth and learning, of adaptation and endurance, and a quiet joy that comes from fulfilling one's purpose in the great web of existence. The song spoke of rain and sunshine in equal measure, not just a physical phenomena that nourish growing things, but the metaphorical storms and clearings that mark every life, the times of difficulty that make the peaceful moments sweeter, the seasons of darkness that teach appreciation for the light. There was something infinitely comforting about this acknowledgement of life's inevitable cycles. The way the tree's music seemed to say that all things had their proper time and place, that even sorrow served its purpose in the greater composition of existence. As the melody wove itself through the night air, other elements of the garden began to add their voices to the willow song. The lily pads in the small pond pulsed more gently with each phrase, their light dimming and brightening in rhythm with the music, as if they were visual notes in a symphony written in both sound and radiance. The night-blooming flowers seemed to open and close their petals in response to particular passages, creating waves of fragrance that added another dimension to the sensory experience, turning the garden into a space where sight, sound, and scent combined to create something that transcended any single sense. From their various balconies, the other guests of the inn continued their silent vigil, but now their stillness had taken on a different quality. Where before they had been simply watching, now they were clearly listening as well, their faces reflecting not just wonder, but the deep satisfaction that comes from hearing music that speaks directly to the soul. The elderly gentleman had closed his eyes and was swaying slightly, almost imperceptibly, in time with the willow's rhythm, while the young woman had pressed her hands to her heart, as if trying to hold the music within her chest where it might continue to play even after the night had ended. The middle-aged couple had moved closer together, their bodies naturally synchronizing with the tree's gentle tempo, while the young man who had been sitting on the edge of his balcony now lay back against the stone railing, his arms behind his head, his face turned upward toward the stars as he could see the music rising into the night sky like visible prayer. The elderly woman in her rocking chair had allowed her movements to fall into perfect harmony with the song, her chair creaking softly in counterpoint to the willow's melody, adding its own humble voice to the garden's nocturnal chorus. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about the tree's song was the way it seemed to understand and respond to its human audience. As more listeners appeared on their balconies, for word seemed to be spreading somehow through the inn, drawing other guests from their chambers to witness this nightly miracle. The music grew richer and more complex, as if the willow were a master musician adjusting its performance to match the size and receptiveness of its audience. New themes emerged as the song continued, variations on the original melody that explored different emotional territories, while never losing the essential character of peace and wisdom that marked the willow's fundamental nature. There were passages that spoke of childhood wonder, of the kind of joy that comes from discovering something beautiful for the first time. Other sections seemed to address the particular sorrows that mark adult life, the loss of loved ones, the weight of responsibilities, the slow accumulation of small disappointments that can burden the heart if not properly understood and integrated. But the tree's wisdom was such that it never lingered too long on any single emotion, always returning to the central theme of acceptance and harmony, the understanding that all experiences, pleasant and painful alike, were part of the greater symphony of existence. The music seemed to suggest that just as a tree needed both rain and sunshine to grow, humans needed both joy and sorrow to develop the depth and resilience that marked true maturity. As the song progressed, Emma began to notice that other guests were not content simply to listen from their balconies, moving slowly and quietly. With the respectful care of pilgrims approaching a shrine, some had begun to make their way down to the garden itself. They emerged from the inn's lower doors like figures from a dream, their night clothes gleaming softly in the mysterious light, their movements unhurried and reverent as they followed the pearl-bright pathways toward the singing tree. There was the elderly gentleman, moving with surprising grace despite his years, his face reflecting a peace so profound it seemed to emanate from his very being. Behind him came the young woman, her bare feet silent on the smooth stones, her long hair flowed behind her like a banner of silk. The middle-aged couple walked hand in hand, their steps perfectly synchronized not just with each other, but with the rhythm of the willow's song, while other guests followed in small groups or alone, all drawn by the same irresistible call to draw closer to the source of such extraordinary beauty. But what was most remarkable about this procession was its quality of perfect naturalness. No one seemed surprised to find themselves walking in night clothes through an enchanted garden. No one questioned the propriety of leaving their chambers to follow music that had no visible source. It was as if the garden's magic had the power to suspend not just disbelief, but the entire weight of social convention and practical concern, creating a space where the heart's deepest longings could express themselves without shame or hesitation. As these midnight pilgrims approached the willow, the tree seemed to acknowledge their presence by modifying its song once again. The melody grew softer, more intimate, as if the ancient consciousness within the tree recognized that its audience was no longer distant but present, ready to receive whatever wisdom it might offer to those brave enough to approach closely. The branches swayed in smaller arcs now, their movements more subtle but no less beautiful, while the light that emanated from the garden's flowers seemed to concentrate around the tree's base, creating a natural amphitheater of gentle radiance. The first guests to reach the willow settled themselves on a circular bench that surrounded its massive trunk, their movements unhurried and reverent, their faces reflecting the kind of peace that comes from being exactly where one belongs. Others found comfortable spots among the tree's great roots, which had pushed up to the earth over centuries of growth, creating natural seats and resting places cushioned with the softest moss. Still others remained standing, swaying gently with the tree's rhythm, their bodies naturally falling into harmony with the ancient dance. As more listeners gathered beneath the willow's protective canopy, the quality of the music began to change once more. What had been primarily the sound of leaves brushing against one another now gained new dimensions, as if the tree were revealing instruments that had been hidden within its structure until this moment. The creaking of branches became a percussion section, marking time with the patient rhythm of wood adjusting to gentle stress. The whisper of bark against bark as limbs swayed added its voice to the composition, while from somewhere deep within the trunk came sounds so low they were felt more than heard, the deep bass notes of a living column that had been growing and singing for centuries. But perhaps most extraordinary of all was the way the tree seemed to invite participation from its human audience. As guests settled into comfortable positions around its base, they began to find that their own breathing naturally fell into sync with the music's rhythm. Their heartbeats seemed to slow and regularize, matching some deep pulse that ran through the tree's entire being. Some found themselves humming quietly along with passages that seemed to call for vocal accompaniment, their voices blending so naturally with the willow's song that it became impossible to say where human contribution ended and tree music began. The elderly gentleman, his eyes still closed in peaceful concentration, began to rock very gently back and forth, his movements so perfectly timed with the music that he seemed to become part of the tree's performance. The young woman had settled cross-legged among the roots, her hands resting palm up on her knees in a posture of perfect receptivity. Her face glowed with the kind of joy that comes from recognizing a long-sought truth. Others have found their own ways of joining the tree's meditation, some swaying like saplings in a gentle breeze, others sitting in perfect stillness while their faces reflected the deep peace that the music carried into their hearts. And through it all, the willow continued its ancient song, weaving together all these human hearts into a single congregation of wonder, creating through music alone a communion that transcended the boundaries of individual identity and separate experience, offering to all who would listen profound gift of belonging to something larger and more beautiful than themselves. Part 6. The Midnight Garden Walk. A gentle story to calm your mind before sleep. Drawn by curiosity as gentle as a summer breeze, yet as irresistible as the pull of tides upon the shore, Ember felt a compelling need to descend from the balcony's elevated perspective and join the other pilgrims who had been called to walk among the garden's mysteries. The willow song had woven itself so deeply into consciousness that remaining a distant observer no longer seemed possible. The music demanded participation, invited communion, offered something that could only be fully received through direct experience rather than distant appreciation. Moving with the careful quiet of someone who understood instinctively that this was a sacred time requiring reverence rather than haste, Ember slipped back to the chamber's window, past the bed with its cloud-soft quilts and the washstand with its sprig of lavender, past the burning candle that continued its patient vigil in its holder of carved soapstone. The inn's corridors seemed different now than they had during the earlier ascent to rest, not changed in any physical sense, but transformed by the knowledge that something extraordinary was unfolding just beyond these protective walls. The staircase that had seemed so welcoming during the climb to the chamber now took on the quality of a bridge between two worlds, the ordinary realm of sleep and shelter above, and the enchanted domain that waited below. Each step downward felt like a movement deeper into mystery, a willing descent into wonder that required no courage because it promised only beauty and peace. The pressed flowers in their frames seemed to glow more brightly in the candlelight, as if they too were responding to the garden's nocturnal awakening, while the watercolor landscapes appeared to shift and shimmer, their painted mists seeming to move in harmony with the willow's distant song. The inn's main floor was nearly empty now, most guests having either retired to their chambers or, like Ember, been drawn out into the garden by the irresistible call of the trees' music. A few candles still burned in their sconces, their flames dancing to the same rhythm that seemed to pulse through the entire building, while the great hearth held the dying embers of the evening's fire, glowing like captured stars in a bed of soft gray ash. The very air seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the inn itself were holding its breath in wonder at the nightly miracle unfolding in its garden. The door that led to the garden stood slightly ajar, revealing a rectangle of silver light that seemed to beckon rather than merely illuminate. Beyond the threshold lay a world transformed, where the ordinary laws of light and shadow had been suspended in favor of something far more magical and beautiful. Ember paused for just a moment at this boundary between the known and the mysterious, feeling the weight of choice that comes when one stands at the edge of an experience that promises to change forever one's understanding of what is possible in the world. But the choice, when it came, required no deliberation. The garden's call was too sweet, too welcoming, too full of promise to resist. With a deep breath that seemed to draw in not just air but peace itself, Ember stepped across the threshold and into a realm where wonder walked hand in hand with reality. The first sensation was one of perfect temperature. The night air was neither warm nor cool, but exactly right, as if it had been carefully adjusted to provide ideal comfort for human skin. This was not the random blessing of a pleasant evening, but something that felt deliberate, purposeful, as if the garden possessed the ability to moderate its own atmosphere in service of its visitors' well-being. The air itself seemed to have weight and texture, thick with fragrances that were somehow both exotic and familiar, carrying scents that spoke of distant places and ancient wisdom, while still feeling like home. The grass beneath Ember's bare feet was soft as the finest carpet, each blade perfectly formed and positioned to create a living floor that seemed to welcome every step. This was not the coarse grass of ordinary lawns, struggling to grow despite poor soil and indifferent care, but something that had been nurtured with patience and love until it achieved a perfection that seemed almost supernatural. The blades were cool and slightly damp with dew that felt like liquid silk, and they seemed to spring back from each footstep with a resilience that spoke of deep roots and rich earth. As Ember began to walk along one of the pearl-bright pathways that wound through the garden's heart, the full extent of the transformation became apparent. This was not simply the same space viewed under different lighting conditions, but a realm that had revealed its true nature now that the harsh light of day no longer obscured its secrets. Flowers that seemed merely lovely during daylight hours now glowed with inner radiance that made them appear to be crafted from captured starlight and crystallized dreams. The silver light that Ember had noticed from the balcony was even more remarkable when experienced from ground level. It seemed to emanate not just from the flowers, but from the very earth itself, as if the soil had been enriched with powdered moonbeams and crushed pearls until it achieved a luminescence that was both subtle and unmistakable. The pathways themselves appeared to be made of stone selected not just for their practical qualities, but for their ability to catch and amplify this mysterious radiance, creating streams of light that flowed through the garden like rivers of liquid silver. Each footstep along these glowing paths seemed to trigger gentle responses from the garden around. Night-blooming flowers turned their faces toward the walker as if in greeting, their petals opening wider to release more of their drowsy fragrances into the air. Leaves rustled with soft whispers that might have been the plant kingdom's version of welcome, while the very stones beneath foot seemed to warm slightly, as if the garden were offering its own form of hospitality to those who had chosen to accept its midnight invitation. The air carried scents that were beyond the range of ordinary experience. Not just the honey sweetness of night-blooming cereus or the spicy warmth of stock, but fragrances that seemed to tell stories of their own. Here was the scent of rain falling on sun-warmed earth in a place where it had not rained for months, the sharp green smell of new leaves unfurling in some eternal spring, the warm vanilla fragrance of flowers that bloomed only in the gardens of memory and dream. As Ember moved deeper into this enchanted space, It became apparent that other guests were also wandering the garden's pathways, but their presence added to rather than detracted from the sense of solitude and peace. Like Ember, they moved slowly and quietly, their footsteps silent on the soft grass, their faces reflecting the same wonder and tranquility that comes from finding oneself in a place where the impossible has become not just possible but inevitable. There was the elderly woman who had been rocking in her chair on the balcony above, now walking with surprising grace along a path bordered by luminous white roses, her quilted robe trailing behind her like the train of some celestial garment. Her face wore an expression of perfect contentment, the look of someone who had been searching for something all her life and had finally found it in the most unexpected place. She paused occasionally to bend close to particularly beautiful flowers, not to pick them, for the garden clearly inspired reverence rather than possession, but simply breathe in their fragrances and marvel at their perfection. Near the pond where lily pads pulsed gently like sleeping heartbeats, a young couple walked hand in hand, their steps perfectly synchronized not just with each other, but with a subtle rhythm that seemed to flow through the garden like a living pulse. They spoke in whispers so soft they might have been mistaken for sighing of wind through leaves, their words lost to any observer, but their meaning clear in the tender way they looked at each other, and the peaceful joy that radiated from their joined presence. The young man who had been sitting on his balcony edge now walked alone, but without any sense of loneliness, his path taking him in a wide circle around the garden perimeter, as if he were a pilgrim walking a labyrinth designed to lead not to any external destination, but to the peace that could only be found within. His movements had the quality of meditation made physical, each step deliberate and mindful, his breathing so deep and regular that it seemed to harmonize with the willow's distant song. What was most remarkable about all these midnight wanderers was the way they seemed to move in perfect harmony with one another and with the garden itself, despite following no visible coordination or plan. Paths that might have been crowded in daylight now seemed to expand to accommodate all who walked them, while the timing of each person's journey seemed perfectly calculated to avoid collisions or awkward encounters. It was as if the garden possessed some organizing intelligence that understood the needs and preferences of each visitor, guiding them along routes that would provide maximum beauty and minimum distraction from the deep peace that was clearly the garden's greatest gift. As Ember continued the gentle pilgrimage toward the willow tree, which stood at the garden's heart, like a great green lighthouse, sending out waves of song instead of light, the path revealed new wonders with every step. Here was a grove of night-blooming jasmine trained on trellises that seemed to be crafted from moonbeams made solid, their white flowers cascading in such profusion that they created natural archways overhead. The fragrance here was so intense yet so perfectly balanced that it seemed to enter not just to the nose, but through every pore, filling the entire body with a sense of well-being that was both physical and spiritual. There, a section of the path wound between beds of herbs that released their essences with each footfall, thyme that smelled of mountain meadows, rosemary that carried the scent of ancient wisdom, lavender that spoke of peaceful dreams and healing rest. These were not the harsh, overpowering fragrances of perfumes designed to announce their presence, but subtle gifts that enhanced rather than overwhelmed, that invited rather than demanded attention. The pond, when Ember reached its edge, proved to be even more beautiful when viewed from ground level than it had appeared from the balcony above. The water was so clear and still that it served as a perfect mirror for the star-scattered sky, creating the illusion that one could step into it and fall upward into the heavens themselves. The lily pads floated on the celestial reflection like islands in a sea of stars, their flowers glowing with soft radiance that seemed to pulse in time with some cosmic heartbeat too vast and slow for human perception, yet perfectly comprehensible to the soul. Small fish moved beneath the surface like living jewels, their scales catching and reflecting the mysterious light until they seemed to be swimming through liquid starlight. Occasionally one would rise to investigate some floating bit of pollen or fallen petal, sending gentle rings spreading across the water's surface, disrupting the reflected stars only momentarily before the surface returned to its mirror-perfect stillness. Around the pond's edges, cattails and water iris created a natural border that seemed designed by nature's most skilled architect. The cattails stood like gentle sentinels, their brown seed heads swaying with a rhythm that perfectly complemented the willow's distant song, while the iris lifted their purple and yellow blooms like banners celebrating the water's purity and the night's magic. Here and there, a night heron stood motionless as a carved statue among the reeds, its presence adding to the sense that this was not merely a decorative water feature, but a living ecosystem where every creature had found its perfect place. The path curved away from the pond now, leading through a section of the garden where night-blooming stock filled the air with their clove-scented perfume, their four-petal flowers opening like tiny stars against the darkness. These humble blossoms, unremarkable in daylight, had transformed mysterious illumination into jewels of incredible delicacy, each one perfect in its simple beauty, each one contributing its voice to the garden's symphony of fragrance and light. As Ember drew closer to the willow tree, the sense of approaching something sacred grew stronger with every step. The ancient tree's presence seemed to fill the entire garden, not through any overwhelming display of power, but through the quiet authority that comes from centuries of patient growth and wisdom accumulated through countless seasons of change. Its song, which had been audible but distant from the balcony above, now filled the air with rich harmonies that seemed to resonate in the very bones, creating a sense of connection not just with the tree itself, but with all the life it had witnessed and sheltered over its long existence. The circular bench that surrounded the willow's massive trunk was already occupied by several of the inn's guests, but there was something magical about the way space seemed to expand to accommodate each new arrival. No one had to squeeze together or make room in the ordinary sense. Instead, the bench itself seemed to grow longer, more welcoming, as if it possessed the same generous spirit as the tree it encircled. The elderly gentleman sat with his back against the willow's deeply furrowed bark, his eyes closed in peaceful meditation, his breathing so deep and regular that it seemed to harmonize perfectly with the tree's ancient rhythms. Beside him, the young woman from the balcony had settled into a cross-legged position, her hands resting palm up on her knees in a posture of perfect receptivity. Her face glowed with an inner light that seemed to echo the garden's mysterious radiance, and occasionally she would smile as if hearing some particularly beautiful passage in the tree's ongoing composition. Other guests had found their own ways of joining this midnight congregation. Some sat in comfortable silence, simply allowing the tree's music to wash over them like a healing balm for troubles they hadn't even realized they were carrying. Others swayed gently in time with the willow's rhythm, their movements so natural and unconscious that they seemed to have become part of the tree's own dance. A few hummed quietly along with passages that seemed to call for vocal accompaniment, their voices blending so seamlessly with the leafy symphony that it became impossible to distinguish between human song and tree music. As Ember approached this peaceful gathering, the willow's branches seemed to part slightly, creating a natural opening that led directly to an unoccupied section of the bench. The invitation was unmistakable, not demanding or insistent, but gentle and welcoming, like the gesture of a gracious host indicating where an honored guest might find the most comfortable seat. The tree's song seemed to shift slightly in key as Ember approached, as if acknowledging the presence of a new listener and adjusting its performance accordingly. The bark beneath Ember's back, when the wanderer finally settled against the ancient trunk, was surprisingly smooth and warm, worn to a gentle texture by centuries of weather and the touch of countless visitors who had sought rest and wisdom in this peaceful spot. Through the bark, it was possible to feel the slow, steady pulse of the tree's life force, not dramatic or overwhelming, but as consistent and reassuring as a mother's heartbeat heard from within the womb. From this position at the tree's base, surrounded by fellow pilgrims who had been drawn by the same irresistible call to communion with something larger and wiser than themselves, Ember could finally understand the full complexity of the willow song. What had seemed from a distance to be primarily the sound of leaves rustling in the breeze now revealed itself as a composition of incredible sophistication, layered with melodies and harmonies that spoke not just of wind and weather, but of the deep mysteries that lie at the heart of all growing things. The song spoke of roots that reached deep into the earth, drawing not just water and nutrients, but wisdom from the accumulated experience of countless seasons. It sang of the patient work of photosynthesis, the daily miracle by which sunlight was transformed into substance, creating the wood and bark and leaves that formed the tree's physical being. It celebrated the partnerships formed with birds and insects, the mutual dependence that bound all living things into a web of relationship and support. But beyond these practical matters, the willow's music addressed deeper questions that touched the very meaning of existence itself. It spoke of the beauty that could be found in simply being present to each moment as it unfolded, of the peace that came from accepting one's place in the great cycle of growth and change and renewal. It celebrated the value of providing shelter and comfort to others, of standing firm against storms while remaining flexible enough to bend rather than break when the winds of change grew strong. As the night deepened around this gathering of human souls and ancient tree, the boundaries between individual consciousness and shared experience began to blur in the most gentle and natural way possible. The Willow Song seemed to weave all present into a single tapestry of awareness, creating a communion that transcended words or even thoughts, touching something deeper than intellect or emotion, the fundamental recognition that all life was connected, all beings part of a single, vast, and beautiful whole. In this state of perfect peace and belonging, time itself seemed to slow and stretch, each moment becoming infinitely precious, infinitely full of meaning and beauty. The guests around the tree's base continued their various forms of participation in the ongoing miracle, some sitting in silent meditation, others moving in gentle harmony with the music, all of them united in their recognition that they were witnessing something that would remain in their hearts long after the night had ended and they had returned to the ordinary concerns of waking life. The Willow Song continued to evolve and develop, introducing new themes and variations as if the ancient tree were sharing not just its music, but its memories, echoes of all the seasons it had witnessed, all the storms it had weathered, all the moments of joy and sorrow it had observed from its patient post at the garden's heart. Each passage seemed to offer its own gift of wisdom or comfort, creating a teaching that required no words because it spoke directly to the soul's deepest understanding. And through it all, the garden's mysterious light continued to pulse and flow around them, carried by breezes that smelled of jasmine and roses, of herbs and honey, and the indefinable fragrance of peace itself. The Midnight Garden Walk had led not just to a physical destination, but to a state of being where wonder and tranquility merged into something that was neither fully waking nor sleeping, but partook of both the clarity of consciousness and the healing power of dreams. Part 7. The Willow's Wisdom. A gentle story to calm your mind before sleep. Beneath the great willow, with its ancient trunk rising like a living pillar toward the star-scattered sky, Ember found a comfortable spot among the massive roots that had pushed up through the earth over centuries of patient growth. These roots, worn smooth by countless seasons of rain and sunshine, had created natural seats and resting places that seemed designed by nature's most thoughtful architect. Each curve and hollow had been shaped not by human hands, but by time itself, forming chairs and benches that fit the human form with surprising comfort, as if the tree had spent decades learning the contours of those who sought rest in its shadow. The spot Ember chose was cushioned with the softest moss, deep green and thick as velvet, that had grown in the gentle shade cast by the willow's drooping branches. This moss was not the rough, sparse growth found in ordinary forests, but something that seemed to have been nurtured with the same care and attention that marked every other aspect of the garden. It yielded gently beneath the body's weight while providing perfect support, creating a natural cushion that was somehow exactly the right temperature, neither too warm nor too cool, but perfectly suited to encourage the kind of deep relaxation that prepares both body and spirit for the reception of wisdom. From this intimate position, nestled among the tree's great roots like a child in the lap of a beloved grandparent, Ember could feel the slow, steady pulse of life that flowed through the willow's massive form. This was not the quick, anxious rhythm of human circulation, but something far deeper and more ancient, the patient heartbeat of a being that had learned to measure time not in minutes or hours, but in seasons and years, decades and centuries. Through the bark and wood, through root and earth, this pulse seemed to connect with Ember's own heartbeat, gradually slowing it, steadying it, bringing it into harmony with the tree's ancient rhythm. The Willow's Song, which had been beautiful enough when heard from the balcony above and more complex when experienced during the garden walk, now revealed depths and subtleties that had been impossible to perceive from any distance. What had seemed like the simple rustling of leaves in the evening breeze was revealed to be a composition of incredible sophistication, layered with melodies that intertwined and separated, harmonized and counterpoint, with all the complexity of the finest music ever created by human composers, yet possessing something no human creation could match, the authenticity of a voice that spoke from centuries of lived experience. But more remarkable than the music's complexity was its clarity of meaning. Though the tree's song had no words in any human language, its message was somehow perfectly understood by all who listened with open hearts. It was as if the willow possessed the ability to speak directly to that part of human consciousness that existed before language, that primal understanding that recognizes truth not through logic or analysis, but through the immediate recognition that comes when the soul encounters something that resonates with its deepest nature. The tree sang first of the beauty that could be found in small things, not the grand, dramatic beauty that commanded attention through sheer spectacle, but the quiet perfection that revealed itself only to those who had learned to see with patient eyes. It spoke of dewdrops caught in spider webs at dawn, each one a perfect sphere that held within it the reflected glory of the entire world. It celebrated the first green shoots of spring pushing to the last patches of winter snow, tiny miracles of persistence and hope that proved life's eternal capacity for renewal. In the tree's song, autumn's golden leaves were not symbols of ending, but of fulfillment, each one a certificate of completion for another year's worth of patient service to the great work of photosynthesis and growth. The willow sang of these leaves' final dance as they spiraled down from branch to earth, each one following its own path, yet all participating in the same magnificent celebration of seasons completed and cycles fulfilled. The song spoke of rain, not as an inconvenience to be endured or merely as necessary moisture for growth, but as a gift of incredible generosity from sky to earth, each drop carrying within the potential for new life, new growth, new possibilities. The tree's music made it possible to hear the individual voices of raindrops striking different surfaces, the gentle patter on broad leaves, the musical ping against stone, the soft absorption into thirsty earth, all combining into a symphony that spoke of abundance and blessing freely given. Sunshine, too, had its voice in the willow's song, not the harsh glare of midday heat, but the gentle warmth of morning light filtering through leaves, the golden radiance of afternoon sun slanting through forest shadows, the soft glow of evening light that turned ordinary landscapes into realms of magic and wonder. The tree sang of how this light became part of its very being through the daily miracle of photosynthesis, transforming mere energy into wood and bark, leaves and flowers, the solid substance of living matter created from nothing more substantial than air and sunlight and the patient alchemy of life itself. But perhaps the most profound theme in the willow's song was its celebration of time itself. Not time as a harsh taskmaster that drives human anxiety and hurry, but time as a gentle friend that allows all things to unfold at their proper pace. The tree sang of the wisdom that comes from understanding that everything has its season, that growth cannot be hurried beyond its natural limits, that patience is not merely a virtue, but a fundamental requirement for any lasting achievement or deep understanding. Be gentle with yourself. The tree seemed to whisper through its rustling leaves, its voice carrying all the authority of centuries spent learning this lesson through direct experience. This was not the superficial kindness that ignores problems or avoids difficulty, but the deep compassion that recognizes struggle as an inevitable part of growth, that understands the difference between the pain that teaches and strengthens and the suffering that serves no constructive purpose. The willow's wisdom spoke of the importance of self-forgiveness, of learning to accept one's own mistakes and limitations with the same grace one would offer to a beloved friend. It sang of the futility of holding grudges against oneself for past errors, pointing out through its music that even the mightiest trees sometimes lost branches to storms, sometimes grew in directions that later proved less than ideal, yet continue to grow and flourish despite these apparent setbacks. Be patient with your dreams. The tree continued in its wordless language, and this message seemed to resonate particularly deeply with every listener gathered in the peaceful circle around its base. The willow song spoke of seeds that might lie dormant in the earth for years before finding the right conditions for germination, of saplings that grew slowly and quietly for decades before their true strength and beauty became apparent, of flowers that bloomed only once in many years, but whose rare appearance was all the more precious for its rarity. The tree's music suggested that human dreams and aspirations followed similar patterns, that ideas planted in youth might not bear fruit until middle age or beyond, that talents nurtured in obscurity might suddenly find their moment of recognition when the time was right, that goals that seemed impossible in one season might become achievable in another if patience and persistence were maintained through the intervening years. All things come in their proper time, the willow sang, like flowers opening to the sun. This was not a message of passive resignation, but of active trust in the natural order that governs all growth and development. The tree's wisdom recognized the difference between the impatience that leads to premature action and potentially harmful rushing, and the vigilant readiness that allows one to recognize and seize opportunities when they finally do appear. The willow spoke through its music of the seasons of human life, comparing them to the annual cycle that every tree experienced. It sang of the spring of childhood, when everything was new and full of potential, when growth came quickly and energy seemed limitless. It celebrated the summer of youth and early adulthood, the time of maximum vigor and achievement, when the hard work of building and creating demanded full attention and effort. But the tree's wisdom also honored the autumn of maturity, when the focus shifted from acquisition and achievement to the sharing of wisdom and the enjoyment of accumulated experience. It spoke of this season not as decline, but as fulfillment, comparing it to the time when the tree's branches were heavy with fruit, when years of patient growth finally produced a harvest that would nourish others and ensure the continuation of life into future generations. Even winter had its place in the willow's song, not as death but as rest, the necessary pause between cycles that allowed for renewal and regeneration. The tree sang of the beauty that could be found in dormancy, the quiet strength that came from knowing one can conserve energy, when to wait, when to trust that spring would come again in its proper time. As the willow's wisdom continued to unfold through music that seemed to grow richer and more complex with each passing moment, the assembled listeners found themselves drawn deeper into contemplation of their own lives and experiences. The tree's song had the remarkable quality of being simultaneously universal and deeply personal, speaking to truths that apply to all living beings while somehow addressing the specific concerns and questions that each individual carried in their heart. The elderly gentleman, his back still resting against the tree's ancient bark, found in the music of validation of the choices he had made throughout his long life, a reassurance that the patience he had learned through years of experience was indeed wisdom rather than merely the absence of youthful energy. The young woman heard in the willow's song permission to trust her own instinct about timing, to resist the pressure to force her dreams into premature manifestation, to believe that her careful nurturing of her talents and aspirations would eventually bear fruit. The middle-aged couple, still holding hands as they sat in peaceful communion with the tree and their fellow listeners, recognized in the music a celebration of the season of life they were currently experiencing, no longer the frantic spring of early adulthood, not yet the contemplative autumn of later years, but the rich summer of mature love and shared understanding, when the dreams of youth have been tempered by experience and transformed into achievable goals. Each listener found their own meaning in the willow's wordless teaching, yet all were united in their recognition that they were receiving something precious, not just entertainment or even inspiration, but genuine wisdom that could serve as a guide for living with greater peace and purpose. The tree's song seemed to offer perspective that transcended the immediate concerns and anxieties that so often dominated human consciousness, providing instead a view from the heights of deep time and accumulated understanding. As the music continued to weave its spell of peace and wisdom around the gathered congregation, the very air seemed to grow thicker with meaning, charged with the kind of significance that makes ordinary moments feel sacred. The night itself seemed to lean in closer, as if all of creation were participating in this transfer of ancient knowledge from the plant kingdom to human hearts that had proven themselves ready to receive it. The willow's song spoke now of connection and interdependence, reminding its listeners that no being exists in isolation, that the health and happiness of each individual is intimately connected to the well-being of the whole. It sang of the invisible networks that bind all living things together, the fungal threads that connect forest trees in vast communication networks, the pollinating insects that link flower to flower across miles of countryside, the cycles of weather and season that ensure no creature or plant is ever truly alone. This message of connection extended to the human realm as well, the tree's wisdom suggesting that the peace and understanding being shared in this midnight garden would ripple outward into the world, touching other lives in ways that might never be directly visible, but would nonetheless contribute to great work of healing and harmony that was every conscious being's deepest calling. Through its ancient voice, the willow offered one final gift to those who had gathered to listen, the assurance that this moment of peace and wisdom was not a temporary escape from reality, but a glimpse of the deeper reality that underlies all surface appearances, the eternal truth that beauty and meaning and love are the fundamental forces that govern the universe, while fear and anxiety and despair are merely temporary shadows cast by misunderstanding and forgotten connection to the source of all life and joy. Part 8. The Return to Rest. A gentle story to calm your mind before sleep. As the deepest part of night approached, when the stars reached their brightest intensity and the moon, though still a slender crescent, seemed to glow with particular clarity against the velvet darkness, a subtle change began to manifest throughout the enchanted garden. The transformation was so gradual, so gentle, that at first it seemed like nothing more than a shift in the quality of attention among the Willow's listeners, a natural deepening of the contemplative mood that had settled over the gathering, like a blessing made tangible. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the silver light that had illuminated the garden with such mysterious beauty began to fade, not with the abrupt extinction of candles blown out by wind, but with the gradual dimming of embers settling into peaceful slumber. The flowers that had glowed with inner radiance throughout the night maintained their luminescence, but it grew softer, more subdued, like the gentle glow of pearl seen through layers of silk. The lily pads in the pond continued their rhythmic pulsing, but their light became more like the memory of brightness than brightness itself, creating an atmosphere of profound tranquility that seemed to enfold the entire space in preparation for the return to ordinary consciousness. The Willow's song, which had reached such heights of complexity and meaning during the hours of deepest communion, began to take on a different character as well. The intricate harmonies and elaborate variations that had spoken of life's grand themes and eternal truths gradually simplified, returning to something closer to the gentle rustling that had first drawn the guests from their chambers. But this was not a diminishment so much as a distillation, as if the tree were now offering not the full symphony of wisdom, but a simple lullaby that would carry its essential message into the realm of dreams. The music grew softer and more distant, like a familiar song heard through the walls of memory, maintaining its power to comfort and heal while no longer demanding the kind of active attention that had characterized the night's deeper teachings. It was as if the Willow understood that its human audience, having received the gifts of wisdom and perspective that the garden offered, now needed to begin the gentle transition back to the world of individual consciousness and personal rest. Around the tree's great trunk, the assembled listeners began to stir with the natural movements of people emerging from deep meditation. There was nothing hurried or jarring about these movements, no sudden awakening from trance, no disorienting return to ordinary awareness. Instead, the transition was as smooth and natural as a progression from waking consciousness into peaceful sleep, each person finding their own perfect timing for the return journey that would lead them back to their chambers and the rest that their bodies required. The elderly gentleman was among the first to rise, moving with the careful grace of someone who had learned to honor both his body's limitations and its enduring strength. He stood slowly, one hand braced against the Willow's supportive trunk, his movements deliberate and mindful rather than hurried. For a long moment he remained still, his palm pressed against the ancient bark, as if receiving one final blessing from the tree that had shared so much wisdom throughout the night. His face reflected the profound peace that comes from having touched something eternal, something that would remain with him long after the memory of this particular evening had faded into the general glow of treasure experiences. When he finally stepped away from the tree, the elderly gentleman moved with a lightness that seemed to come not from his physical form, but from the lifting of burdens he might not even have realized he was carrying. His shoulders, which had carried the weight of many years and many responsibilities, now seemed straighter, more relaxed. His step, while still careful and measured, had gained a quality of quiet joy, as if he were walking not just across the garden's pearl-bright pathways, but along a road that led toward new possibilities and deeper understanding. The young woman rose next, unfolding from her cross-legged position with the fluid grace of someone whose body had been completely relaxed rather than strained by the long period of sitting in contemplation. She stood for a moment with her arms stretched toward the star-scattered sky, breathing deeply the jasmine-scented air, her face tilted upward as if drinking in the last drops of the night's magic. When she finally lowered her arms and began to move away from the tree, her steps had the quality of a dance, each footfall perfectly placed, perfectly timed, as if she were still moving in harmony with the Willow's fading song. One by one, the other garden visitors began their own gentle departures, each following their internal timing, each finding their own way of honoring both the experience they had shared and the individual journey that now called them back to their chambers. The middle-aged couple rose together, their movements synchronized by the deep understanding that comes from years of shared experience. They walked hand in hand along the glowing pathways, their pace unhurried, their faces reflecting the kind of contentment that comes from having witnessed something beautiful together. Other guests found their own rhythms for departure. Some paused to touch the willow's trunk in farewell. Others stopped to breathe deeply of the night-blooming flower's fragrances one final time. A few lingered at the pond's edge, watching the lily pads' gentle pulsing until the last traces of their luminescence faded into ordinary starlight reflected on still water. All moved with the reverent care of pilgrims leaving a sacred site, understanding instinctively that the manner of their departure was as important as the experience they had received. Ember, too, felt the natural stirring that indicated the time for return had come. Rising from the comfortable nest among the willow's roots felt like emerging from the most perfect dream. Not the jarring awakening that comes from being torn from sleep by external demands, but the gentle surfacing that occurs when the dreaming mind has completed its work and is ready to return to ordinary consciousness, enriched by the journey it has undertaken. Standing beneath the willow's protective canopy for the last time, Ember felt the tree's ancient presence like a benevolent blessing, a gift that would continue to unfold its meaning in the days and weeks to come. The bark beneath the palm still pulsed with that slow, steady rhythm that had synchronized so perfectly with the human heartbeat, but now it seemed to be offering not active teaching, but the kind of supportive energy that a parent might give to a child setting out on an independent journey. The walk back through the garden took on the quality of a pilgrimage in reverse, each step carrying Ember further from the concentrated magic of the willow's presence, but deeper into the integration of the night's experiences. The pathways, though their pearl-bright glow was fading, still provided sure footing and clear direction, while the night-blooming flowers continued to release their drowsy fragrances, now serving less as invitations to wonder than as gentle accompaniments to the journey back to rest. The garden itself seemed to be settling into a different kind of peace, not the dynamic harmony that had characterized the hours of active teaching and communion, but a profound stillness that comes after great work has been completed and the time for rest has truly arrived. The very air seemed to grow softer, more conducive to sleep, while the temperature remained perfectly comfortable, neither warm enough to stimulate continued wakefulness nor cool enough to require hurried movement toward shelter. As Ember approached the inn's welcoming doors, other returning pilgrims could be seen making their own quiet journeys back to their chambers. But now, instead of the sense of individual isolation that might be expected from people pursuing separate paths, there was a subtle feeling of continued connection, as if the communion experience beneath the willow had created bonds that would persist despite physical separation. Nods of recognition and gentle smiles passed between the returning guests, acknowledgments of shared experience that required no words but carried deep meaning nonetheless. The inn itself seemed to welcome these returning wanderers with the same gracious hospitality it had offered upon their arrival. Candles still burned in their sconces, providing gentle illumination for the journey back to rest, while the stairs that led to the upper chambers seemed even more inviting than they had hours earlier. The very walls seemed to radiate the kind of peace that comes from sheltering those who have touched something sacred and now seek the ordinary blessing of comfortable sleep. The climb to the upper floor felt different from the earlier ascent, less like the approach to an unknown destination, and more like the return to a place that had become truly familiar, truly welcoming. Each step carried not the anticipation of what might be discovered ahead, but the satisfaction of returning to a sanctuary that had already proven its worth. The pressed flowers in their frames seemed to glow more softly in the candlelight, while the watercolor landscapes appeared more dreamlike, more suited to the liminal state between waking and sleeping that was now settling over the inn's guests. When Ember finally reached the chamber door, the familiar handle turned as smoothly as before, but now the room beyond seemed less like a place of temporary lodging and more like a true refuge, a space that had been prepared not just for physical rest, but for the kind of deep sleep that allows the integration of profound experiences. The bed with its cloud-soft quilts appeared even more inviting than it had upon first sight, while the washstand with its sprig of lavender seemed to promise not just physical cleanliness, but spiritual purification as well. The window that looked out upon the garden still framed the view of the willow tree, but now the ancient giant appeared in its more familiar aspect, a large and stately tree rather than the mystical teacher it had revealed itself to be during the night's deepest hours. The change was not a disappointment, but rather a natural completion, like the closing of a book whose story has reached its perfect conclusion. The magic had not disappeared, but had fulfilled its purpose, leaving behind not emptiness, but the quiet satisfaction that comes from having received exactly what was needed. The chamomile tea that Rosalind had left on the bedside table had long since grown cold, but when Ember lifted the delicate cup, its contents still carried the promise of peaceful dreams and restorative sleep. The liquid had taken on the temperature of the room, neither warm nor cool, but perfectly neutral, like water that had been blessed for sacred purposes. Each sip seemed to carry not just the herbal properties of chamomile, but something of the night's experiences, as if the tea had somehow absorbed the essence of the garden's teachings and was now offered in a form that could be easily assimilated into dreams. As Ember prepared for the sleep that was now calling with irresistible sweetness, the memory of the willow's wisdom continued to resonate in consciousness, not as something that needed to be actively remembered or analyzed, but as a deep knowing that had become part of the very fabric of being. The tree's messages about patience and gentleness, about finding beauty in small things and trusting the natural timing of all growth and development, had become not just intellectual concepts, but lived understanding that would inform future choices and responses to life's inevitable challenges. Part 9. The Dawn of Dreams. A gentle story to calm your mind before sleep. As sleep finally claimed the traveler with the gentle inevitability of evening mist settling over peaceful valleys, the transition from waking consciousness to dreams came not as an abrupt descent into darkness, but as the most natural progression imaginable, like walking from a well-lit room into another that was illuminated by softer, more mysterious light. Ember's last conscious perception was of the gentle gleam of early starlight filtering through a jasmine-framed window, where the climbing flowers continued their quiet vigil, their white blooms glowing like captured moonbeams against the ancient stone of the inn's walls. The sleep that embraced the weary traveler was unlike ordinary rest. Not the heavy, sometimes troubled slumber that comes from mere physical exhaustion, but something far more restorative and profound. It was a kind of sleep that arrives when both body and spirit have found exactly what they were seeking, when the deep hunger for peace and understanding has been satisfied in ways that go beyond the merely intellectual or emotional. This was sleep that carried within the essence of the willow's wisdom, dreams that would be touched by the garden's magic, rest that would heal not just the fatigue of a day's journey, but the accumulated weariness of years spent searching for something whose name had never been quite clear. In this blessed state of repose, consciousness did not simply shut down, but transformed into something more fluid, more permeable to the subtle influences that flow between the world of ordinary experience and the realm of deeper truths. The dreams that came were not the chaotic fragments of unprocessed daily experience that often populate sleep, but coherent visions that seem to continue and elaborate upon the night's teachings, carrying the garden's lessons into the landscape of the unconscious mind where they could take root and grow in ways that daylight logic could never achieve. Ember dreamed of walking through meadows that stretched beyond the horizon, fields of grass so green and perfect that each blade seemed to have been individually crafted by master artisans who understood that beauty could be found in even the humblest details. In these dream meadows, flowers bloomed in patterns that told stories without words, their colors shifting and changing to match the emotional resonance of the tales they conveyed. Here was a patch of blue forget-me-nots that spoke of faithful friendship. There a cluster of yellow buttercups that celebrated the simple joy of being alive. And throughout the fields, white daisies that seemed to represent the kind of innocent wonder that allows the soul to remain open to new experiences regardless of age or past disappointments. Through these dream landscapes, other figures moved with the same peaceful purpose that had characterized the garden's midnight visitors. The elderly gentleman was there, but in the dream he appeared not as someone burdened by years, but as a person whose age had been transformed into a source of gentle authority and deep compassion. He walked among the dream flowers with a basket over his arm, collecting not the blooms themselves, but something invisible yet precious. Perhaps the essence of each flower's particular gift, the accumulated wisdom that could only be gathered by those who had learned to see beyond surface appearances. The young woman appeared as well. But in the dream her youth had taken on a quality of timeless grace, as if she had somehow learned to inhabit the eternal spring of the soul where hope and possibility remain forever fresh. She danced through the meadows with movements that seemed to encourage the flowers to bloom more brightly, her very presence serving as a catalyst for the kind of beauty that emerges when joy finds its perfect expression in the world. The middle-aged couple walked hand in hand through these dream fields, but now their relationship seemed to encompass not just their personal bond, but a representation of all the ways that individual beings can choose to support and complement each other in the great work of living with wisdom and compassion. Their synchronized steps created a rhythm that seemed to organize the entire dream landscape, bringing order without rigidity, harmony without uniformity. In the deepest part of sleep, Ember's dreams returned again and again to the willow tree, but now the ancient guardian appeared in forms that revealed even more of its essential nature. Sometimes it was a library whose branches were laden not with leaves, but with books whose pages contained all the stories that had ever been told or ever will be told, their wisdom available to anyone who approached with sufficient reverence and patience. Sometimes the tree appeared as a great musical instrument whose strings were the connections between all living things, played by the wind of divine inspiration to create the ongoing symphony of existence itself. In one particularly vivid dream sequence, the willow's roots were revealed to extend not just deep into the earth beneath the garden, but through some mysterious dimension of space and time, connecting to every other tree that had ever served as a teacher or guide to seeking souls. Through these root networks, wisdom flowed like underground rivers, carrying the accumulated understanding of forests and groves from every corner of the world, from every age of human history. The tree in the garden was revealed to be not an isolated individual, but a member of a vast community of wisdom keepers, all connected by invisible threads of knowledge and compassion. As the night progressed and sleep deepened, the dreams became less visual and more purely experiential, carrying Ember into states of consciousness where the boundaries between self and world dissolved completely. These were not the frightening ego-loss experiences that sometimes accompany extreme states, but gentle expansions of awareness that felt as natural as breathing, as comfortable as coming home after a long absence. In these dream states, it became possible to understand from the inside what the willow had been teaching about interconnectedness, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality that could be directly experienced. The inn itself became part of the dreaming, its walls and rooms revealed as something far more significant than mere shelter for travelers. In the dream consciousness, the building was understood to be a kind of way station between worlds, a place where souls in transition could find not just physical rest, but the kind of spiritual renewal that prepares consciousness for whatever journey lies ahead. The pressed flowers on the stairway walls bloomed fresh in the dream landscape, while the watercolor paintings became windows into actual places where peace and beauty reigned eternal. Rosalind appeared in the dreams as well, but her role was revealed to be far more significant than that of a simple innkeeper. In the dream world, she was understood to be a keeper of thresholds, someone whose life's work involved helping souls navigate the delicate passages between different states of being. Her eyes, which had seemed to hold starlight during the waking encounter, now revealed themselves to be windows into a consciousness that had learned to dwell simultaneously in multiple realms, offering guidance to those who were ready to expand beyond the limitations of ordinary perception. The chamomile tea that seemed so simple and humble in the waking world was revealed in dreams to be a sacrament of sorts, a blessing that carried within it the concentrated essence of peace itself. Each sip taken in the dream state seemed to dissolve another layer of anxiety or tension that had been accumulating over years of ordinary living, creating space within consciousness for the kind of clarity and calm that allows wisdom to take root and flourish. Throughout these dream experiences, the sound of the willow's song continued to weave its gentle magic, but now is understood to be part of a much larger composition, the ongoing music of creation itself, the harmonic frequencies that maintain the structural reality while allowing for infinite variation and creativity within that structure. The tree's particular melody was revealed to be just one instrument in an orchestra of cosmic scope, but an essential instrument whose voice added irreplaceable beauty to the greater symphony. As the deepest part night gave way to the earliest hints of approaching dawn, the quality of both sleep and dreams began to shift once again. The profound visions and mystical experiences gradually gave way to gentler, more personal dreams that seemed designed to help integrate the night's teachings into the fabric of ordinary consciousness. These dreams were filled with images of simple daily activities, preparing meals with mindful attention, tending gardens with patient love, having conversations with friends and family that carried deeper currents of understanding and compassion. In these integration dreams, Ember saw glimpses of a future transformed by the night's experiences, not dramatically changed in external circumstances, but infused with quality of presence and appreciation that made even mundane activities feel sacred. The act of walking became a form of meditation, each step taken with awareness of miracle movement and the blessing of having a physical form capable of carrying consciousness through the world. Eating became a form of communion with the plant and animal kingdoms, an acknowledgement of the generosity that allows life to sustain life through the sharing of substance and energy. Work, whatever form it might take, was transformed in these dreams from mere obligation into an opportunity for service and creative expression. Relationships were revealed as sacred partnerships in the great work of learning and growing, each interaction offering possibilities for both receiving and offering the kind of wisdom that helps souls evolve toward greater understanding and compassion. The inn settled into perfect quietude as its walls held the dreams of peaceful guests like a jewelry box holds precious gems. Each sleeping consciousness contributing its own unique radiance to the overall atmosphere of sanctity and rest. The building itself seemed to breathe slowly and deeply, its timbers creaking occasionally with sounds that might have been a wooden equivalent of contented sighs. The candles that had burned throughout the night had now flickered down to gentle pools of wax, their work complete. Their light, no longer needed as natural illumination, began its slow approach from the eastern horizon. Outside, the willow continued its patient vigil, but now its song had become so soft it might have been mistaken for the breathing of the earth itself, the slow inhalation and exhalation of a planet that had found its perfect rhythm after eons of learning and adjustment. The garden's mysterious light had faded completely, leaving the flowers and pathways illuminated only by starlight and the earliest hints of dawn. But somehow this transition felt not like a loss but like a completion. The magic had done its work and could now rest, confident that its gifts had been received by hearts ready to treasure and use them wisely. The first birds began their tentative morning songs, while the guests of the inn remained deep in their transformative sleep, their dreams still unfolding according to the perfect timing that governs all natural processes. These early avian melodies seemed to weave seamlessly with the fading echo of the willow's song, creating a bridge between the mystical experiences of the night and the ordinary blessings of approaching day. And in the morning, when Ember would finally wake, there would indeed be fresh bread and honey for breakfast, baked in ovens that had been warming throughout the night, while bakers who understood their craft as a form of prayer needed love and skill into every loaf. There would be Rosalind's kind smile, carried within it the warmth of someone who had spent her life in service to the deep needs of traveling souls. There would be the long, pleasant road stretching ahead through meadows where larks would sing once more, their voices joining the eternal chorus that celebrates the daily miracle of awakening, renewal, and the endless possibility for joy that each new day carries within its gift of time and light. But for now, in the blessed darkness before dawn, there was only a profound gift of deep, restorative sleep, and dreams as gentle as flower petals falling on still water, carrying within them the seeds of wisdom that would continue to grow and bloom throughout all the days to come, transforming ordinary life into an ongoing celebration of the sacred that dwells within and around all beings who have learned to recognize its presence. Sleep well, dear listener. The night seemed to whisper through every gentle breeze, every soft sound, every peaceful shadow. The morning will come in its own good time, bringing with it all the small joys that make life beautiful. The warmth of sunlight on skin, the taste of clean water, the sound of friendly voices, the sight of flowers opening to welcome the day. But for now, let yourself drift like Ember into the peaceful kingdom of dreams, where wisdom waits to be received by hearts that have learned to be still, where healing flows like a gentle river through consciousness prepared to receive its gifts, where the deepest rest prepares the soul for whatever adventures and opportunities the dawning day will bring. End of story.